Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another TCG meta-analysis. Anthony joining you once again, and Encounter 3 has been in the books for a few weeks now, so we have some more things regarding the meta to discuss. A good amount has happened since we last talked after Encounter 1, and probably the overarching theme of the developments from E3 was returns. A lot of older cards and strategies have shown back up and are making a significant impact, and we'll discuss that, but first, we need to discuss the state of the wide meta that was present in Encounter 1. And that discussion is in regards to how wide teams are being played. As previously discussed, wide decks were all the rage back in Encounter 1 because Devastator was still on everyone's minds. But they've changed their game plan now from relying on chip damage and control elements to packing the tools to launch Alpha Strikes. To show this, let's take a look at the first place decks from each event. Stephen Moss's 5-wide good stuff from E1 and Champion's Cars build from E3. Looking at the concentration of offensive-based actions between each deck, we see Stephen's deck has 5 unique offensive actions with 8 copies split between them, while Champion has 4 offensive boosts but 3 copies of each for a total of 12 boosts total. And funnily enough, we actually saw Steven take a similar route to Champion this event, dropping his basically patented 5-wide build in favor of 4-wide cards, though his suite of actions was a bit less aggro and still packed some control tools. And throwing another hat into the ring, Frank was on bikes this event, and that deck can very easily deliver Alpha Strikes because of Bike Gang. Point is, though, the wide meta is shifting away from who flinches first control matchups and more towards who gets the first nuke off aggro matches. Okay, so now that that's been discussed, there is a detail in that I want to pull out and discuss separately. Cars are back. Now, it's not like they went away in the first place, but this is the first time we've seen them enforced at the top tables in a while. 2 of the top 8, those being Steven and Champion, were pure car builds, and a third build came from Naga that ran 2 cars, Wheeljack and Windcharger, and also used Perceptor, with Cliff being in the side for when he wanted to go pure cars. And when you think about why cars are all of a sudden making a resurgence, it makes sense. Decks are naturally wider these days, and cars having all their untapped shenanigans allow them to either negate the advantages of being wide if they're 3-wide, or expand on their own advantage if they're going 4-wide. Plus, they have 2 of the best archetypal support characters in the game in Cliffjumper and Prowl, so they have a natural draw engine and force multiplier on their team to compound whatever's in the deck. And on that note, if you remember the meta-analysis from Encounter 2, I was yelling at people to pack direct damage up the wazoo, and I'm basically about to do the same thing again with a different card. You need to be packing Lose the Initiative. If this number of cars continues to show up, not packing LTI is going to result in a lot of pain on your end. We're not at the point where I think people need to main deck it, though, so just keep that in mind, but you should be signing a couple copies at minimum. Although, if you want a different way of stopping your opponent's untapped shenanigans, there is always Metroplex. I speculated a while back that Metro was still good despite Crasher being in the format, since the tap part of his bot mode was the more powerful effect, and this event proved that call correct. 2 Metro decks showed up, piloted by Legendary and, unsurprisingly, Aussie, and both made top 8, although both did fall to Champion, Legendary in top 8, and the other was in finals. Sorry I couldn't stop Champion in top 4, Aussie. And I could go on here about what improvements could be made to Metro to help it finally break through, but let's be frank, I'm not qualified to talk about that, so I'll just leave Aussie to discuss where Metro goes from here in the comments. As for the third deck I want to discuss, that would be my call for this event. Double Primes. I've been insistent for a while now that Double Primes was a good call in this meta, and I was right. I ended up getting 4th, but I could have gotten any place above that if it wasn't for Belligerence. Anyways, the theory behind the call was that wide decks, which were expected to remain very control-esque in my mind, needed to be dealt with by blocking their entire swing each attack and being able to one-shot characters or get close every swing. Double Primes are able to do that very effectively in a blue shell, plus with Optimus floating around, you can recover Caymans in the event you weren't able to get a one-shot. Now, the idea did end up working overall, but in the first 2 rounds, I was completely unprepared for the Alpha Strike wide decks that are now popping up and got steamrolled by Steven and Frank. After that, though, I was able to rebound against some control decks that this was designed to beat, and then in the top 8, I actually managed to beat the aggro deck I lost to in round 1, which, like I mentioned, was against Steven. And fun fact, that was my first win against him. I then promptly got steamrolled by Champion because of a belligerence that caused me to lose the game in about 5 minutes in game 1, and then game 2, it showed I stood a chance if belligerence didn't exist, but just some things didn't go my way. So while I did bow out in top 4 and promptly got steamrolled in the 3rd place tiebreaker, thanks Naga, the deck still did what it was designed to do, and then some, so there's some potential for this to stay around going into Encounter 5. Now, there's one more deck I want to discuss, and that is Abominus. He's never been the best deck in the format, but he's been a constant presence since the season started. However, every build until now has been heavy orange, and while we did see another one of those from Zero, we actually saw an honest-to-God control Terracon build from Wheeljank that made top 8, and it's a sight to behold. Not only do you have all the counter spells on Sinner Twin, Cutthroat, and Blot, plus the usual shenanigans with Terror Burst or Shield, plus they lose the initiative, there's a unique party trick that we haven't seen before in competitive play. Manipulate Time. Now, this is one of the infamous text brick cards from Wave 6, so let me break this down for you. You reveal it when one of your characters defends, and when you do, you get tough equal to the number of Quintessons on the field. Or on your side of the field, I should specify. Then, like Overwhelming Advantage, it's asking you to have a specific set of icons on a character's upgrades while also flipping that same set, except here the white icon is replaced with a second green. But should you hit that trigger, your character takes no attack damage, and you untap everyone on your side of the field. I'm not sure how often it got triggered since I didn't see the deck in action until round 5, but when it did fire off, it was scary as hell. It's definitely got some refinement to go. Let's be real, what deck on its first run in event doesn't? But there is potential for Abominus to be either aggro or control going forward, and that is just amazing for diversity reasons. Okay, so now that we've gotten the deck discussions out of the way, let's start talking about some individual cards that stood out or were oddly absent from this event. Starting off, I looked at the battle card usage across all decks in the event. Bashing Shield was unsurprisingly the top removal pick with 14 copies across 10 decks, but number 2 wasn't something with a green icon like Reprocess, but ramming speed with 8 copies in 6 decks, and in top 4, both Bashing and Ramming had 4 copies across 3 decks. Perhaps people are now deciding they can't afford the downsides of Reprocess or Disassemble, but it could just as easily be because of the need to stay on color with the choice of removal. Next up are a pair of armors out of Wave 8, Severed Combiner Hand and Lagarten Spalders, or as we call it around here, Lasagna Sauce. Both of these have instantly cemented themselves as some of the best armors in the game, with Severed Combiner Hand being great against Pierce Happy wide decks, but also in general as we saw this event with double primes, and Lagarten is basically a more consistent reinforced plating, even if the green icon and anti-scrap don't work for 99% of the characters in the game. Of course, they still have the Bashing Shield weakness, but that's a common armor problem, so I can't really knock them for it. Although it does mean you should come prepared with armored removal because of their emergence. Moving on, we come to a card that I said needed to be played in spades previously, but isn't as good anymore as a result of where the meta has shifted. Tripwire. I was saying that previously because I thought the meta would shift even further to 5-wide decks, but instead it's shifted to 4-wide decks, and while there are still some good 5-stars in the meta like Crasher, they're really not the focus anymore, so Tripwire is probably a sideboard inclusion at this time for if you run across Crasher, Devastator, or anything with a heavy amount of small characters. Finally, let's talk about Mechastar again. As previously mentioned, Fusion Borer was banned due to it being way too ubiquitous, and as time goes on, the introduction of Mechastar has proved that point right. It started out at a similar level of play to Fusion Borer, but now in E3 it's dropped off to just 2 copies in one deck. At this point, I think Mechastar really only shines in blue decks or wider teams taking advantage of chip damage, and with the Alpha Strike / car heavy meta we're in at the moment, I'm not sure if we see many Mechastars in E5, if at all, unless someone finds a good blue or wide deck to deal with cars. Of course, this wouldn't be a TFTCG meta discussion on this channel without me talking about Devastator and where he fits in. Honestly, I don't know at the moment. On paper, it seems like he'd fit in, but in practice, I'm not sure. I'll definitely be testing him out for E5 without the wheel turn amplifiers like Heat of Battle and Designated Target, but it's not clear at this point if that will work or if he'll be relegated to being a meta call if 2 or 3 wide teams become king again like in the OI. And that's where everything is at. Again, wide teams are sticking around, but they're definitely more Alpha Strike oriented, so you're going to want to be prepared for that for Encounter 5, I think it is. Maybe it's Encounter 4. Tournament schedule is getting juggled a little bit to my knowledge, but I'm not 100% sure how much that's going to be. It's either going to be E4 or E5, likely E5 if I had to take a wild guess. But in the meanwhile, hopefully you enjoyed what you heard here today. I'd usually say saw, but let's be real, you just saw a bunch of card images. But if you did enjoy what you saw here today, and I immediately say it, there's a little red button you can push down below to show that. And yeah, hopefully we can get back on track here with things. I'll deal with that though. You don't have to worry about a thing. But for now, that will do it for this video. Peace out, y'all.